let's go ahead and get started here. First, thanks everybody for making it out here tonight. I guess I'm Justin Johnson. I'm the city attorney in case anybody here doesn't know who I am. We've been in the process of updating our nuisance code, and we're to the point where we're looking to get a little bit of public feedback on it, just to make sure we're staying on track and doing what the community's wanting. So, give you a little bit of an overview first. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the shortcomings that we have in our current nuisance code. Then we'll talk about ways to fix some of those problems. And then after that, we'll move on to just a brief outline of the current draft of the proposed new code and some of the major differences that come along with that. And then after that, we'll do a section on getting questions and feedback from the audience. First, we'll go through some issues with the current code. Basically, dealing with our current code is kind of like dealing with the nesting dolls that you can see up on the screen. You have to keep peeling back the layers on our current code. So basically, we have a prohibition on unsightly property. Well, what is unsightly? And to figure that out, you've got to check the definition in the code. And it's an accumulation of waste. Well, what's waste? Waste can be domestic waste, industrial waste, or a whole host of issues. And that layering just keeps going on and on and on. So it makes it very difficult for city workers and for property owners to really understand what is actually the issue. Some of the other things are there's a number of conditions that don't plainly fall under our current code. For example, our current grass length provision is related to the length of grass in the neighborhood. Well, if you mow every week, but everyone around you doesn't mow for 2 weeks, that's kind of the problem that you run into when you don't have a set length. So other things are hazardous signs, for example, is not specifically addressed in our code. And we also don't have anything specific as to conditions that decrease neighborhood property values. So other issues that we've got with our current code, it doesn't do a great job of spelling out the process for what happens when nuisance conditions are identified. So questions that people ask themselves: should I have been served papers? Do I need to allow an inspection by the city? Can I appeal the city's order? What happens if I don't correct the conditions? And it's not like they're going to throw me in jail, right? People oftentimes try to find loopholes around getting out of, or find ways to get around doing the maintenance as well. So that's another shortcoming that we have. One of the things we're going to try to do is tighten up these loopholes that people are using to try to get around doing that maintenance. And that kind of segues into the next section here, how we go about fixing the problems that we have. As I just said, you try to close as many of those loopholes as possible to make it difficult for people to skirt that responsibility. The example that I had on the previous page is, say somebody has unlicensed vehicles on their property and they decide to move them out for 2 days and then they move them right back to the property. Well, we've got to start back from square one then, and we just have to keep playing the same song and dance. So things like that, you just try to curb it through the new ordinance. Other things, you try to make the code a lot more specific as to what it's listing, in addition to what the general provisions provide. So you've always got those general provisions to fall back on, but you try to address as many things, as many specific things as you possibly can, because not only does that make things easier on property owners to know what exactly they need to be keeping their eye on and entertaining, but it also makes it easier for code enforcement to specifically list out these code sections that are being violated. So it makes it a lot easier to do order to corrects and a lot narrower to keep those problems addressed. And then you also clearly lay out the steps for what happens when nuisance conditions are identified. So here's a brief outline of the nuisance code as it's laid out in the current draft. I'll just run through the section titles with you. I don't want to run through the whole 14-page proposed ordinance tonight. The purpose section is general. That's something that you'll see with any legislative act. The definitions section, we've really narrowed it down from what it is in our current code, and really moved a lot of those definitions into the actual specific nuisances that we've got outlined under the section 4. There are a few sections that were carried over from the old code, like firewood and the exceptions, and some of the details under the other sections as well. And then once you start getting to section 8, most of those sections are laying out the process, how inspections are done, what the city does once conditions are identified, what needs to be in order to correct, what needs to be served, what is the appeals process, what can the city do to address the nuisance. And then you have your more general provisions like the offenses and penalties, liability for costs, and other kind of boilerplate language. So let's talk a little bit about some differences. On the left here, you'll see the current code section. No owner or occupant of premises shall cause or allow the premises of which he or she is the owner or occupant to become unsightly. So that gets back to peeling back the layers of that onion. It's not very specific. You've got to keep looking in different places to figure out what's actually going on with that. So if you look at the proposed code, and this is just one specific nuisance, and we can look at the document later. I think there's about 20 or so different sections like this that we have in the code, in the proposed code, but it lays out in all these different colored sections here what exactly needs to be addressed. So we're talking about exterior wood surfaces that need to be painted, need to maintain things that are peeling, flaking, chipped paint, need to maintain metal surfaces, remove oxidation stains, keep windows, doors, roofing, gutters, soffit fascia all maintained. And you can see there the attention to detail is a lot greater in the new code than it is in the old code. Another example here, this is for our waste receptacles on the left. Waste receptacles located on exterior property areas shall be provided with covers so that the materials within shall not be exposed to view or to rodents or other pests. Such receptacles shall be kept covered except when the containers are being filled or emptied. So a little bit more specific, but if you compare that to the new code, it's still much more specific. You can see that it covers a bunch of different types of waste. It prohibits all of those from being accumulated, and it requires that they be contained within a covered waste receptacle, which is properly emptied frequently enough so as to prevent waste accumulation that prevents the cover from being effective. So you can't have garbage overflowing and stopping the lid from doing its job. So just that greater attention to detail is going to help both enforcement and property owners to know what they need to do. So next we'll go through a little bit of a few examples of what the potential processes might look like, give you a few different scenarios to think about. First one is kind of your most basic and most optimistic. say you've got nuisance conditions identified and they're all going to start like that. Under this scenario, we send out a courtesy warning to the property agent, and the property agent voluntarily corrects the nuisance conditions, and the city doesn't need to take any further action. So that's your best case scenario, and unfortunately one that we don't see as often as we would like. So, a little bit more complicated. We'll send out an order to correct on the property agent. The property agent does not appeal, and they fail to correct the conditions within the time given. Then we'll have code enforcement go out to the property and abate the conditions, and the cost for that abatement will be taxed against the property by special assessment. Another possibility is we send out an order to correct, and they do not appeal within 10 days. They fail to correct the conditions specified, and at that point we decide to issue them a criminal citation. We take them into the court, and the court orders a fine, possible jail time, and that the nuisance be abated. Another scenario, we serve the order to correct. They do decide to appeal it. The nuisance board determines that the order to correct is valid. At that point, the property agent decides to correct the conditions voluntarily, and then the city closes the file once the corrective action is taken. And the last one here is probably a little bit difficult to read, but it's one of the more complex scenarios I could come up with off the top of my head. So here we identify nuisance conditions. We issue a courtesy warning. The property agent does not correct the conditions. We issue a formal order to correct. The property agent decides to appeal. The nuisance board upholds the order to correct. The property agent still fails to comply within the timeline. The city attempts to abate the nuisance, but is prevented from doing that by the property agent. And at that point, the property agent is issued a criminal citation for preventing the abatement, and the city attorney can file a civil action for an order for abatement and a permanent injunction. So where you end up is the property agent is convicted of a crime, ordered to abate the nuisance, and is permanently prohibited from allowing nuisance conditions to continue on the property by court order. So those are just a few examples of different ways a nuisance can kind of play out. And I could put up hundreds of those, but I think these are a good example. So at this point, as I said, we're looking to get a little bit of feedback from the community, make sure that we get a little input as to things that you want to make sure are included in the new nuisance ordinance. If you think that there's things that should not be included, if you've got things that concern you about the process or comments on that, you know, we're all ears at this point, so I'll open it up to comments. Sure. I think JP would appreciate that.
Very much so.
JP Skelly, Jen Johnston, Mitchell Main Street and beyond. Just want to thank you for your efforts. This is a huge step in helping our downtown historic district, and we're very excited about this. So we've spent a little bit of time digging through it, and we will continue to do so, but we love what we see. So thank you for helping us out. We're very excited about it.
Thanks.
Bev Robinson, Ward 2, City Council. I brought a letter from one of my constituents, and I will not give you all of it, but I'm going to just pick out her main concerns. She's not somebody that feels comfortable speaking in front of people and asked me to bring it to you, and I said, will you please then put it in writing, and she did do so very nicely. The quick and the main part of it is, she says, one of the concerns I have that isn't getting taken care of is the rundown trailer courts. The West Second Trailer Court, the one at 1300 East Birch Street. I have had trailers that no one has lived in for years. They are such eyesores. Why isn't something being done about these? I have a really nice home on East Second Avenue, but just across the street from me is a double-wide trailer with boarded up windows and a single-wide no one has lived in for years. She goes on to say in a different area, when I first moved to Mitchell, I lived in an apartment complex, her and her son, and had to clean the place up. She said the yard and the house were both an absolute mess, but it's what they could afford. Then she goes on to say, my sister also lived in one of these rentals. Her kitchen sink leaked so bad that the floor rotted, and she had to tear the floor up and put floor down herself. The roof leaked and the ceiling was all bubbled up. Only when the hot water heater about gassed her out did the landlord finally do something. Please, something needs to be done about slumlords who don't fix anything but want their money.
Thanks, Doug. Any other comments?
Two things that we should point out, I suppose, I don't have the microphone. If there is someone who was not here today and they want to just at least see that overview on the ordinance change, we will have this posted to our YouTube channel. Another thing, if there was anyone that was here that was not able, or was not here and was unable to provide feedback, the city has added, try to see if I can move this over, a public comment section on our community voice page, so they can come into this public forum and post any ideas or suggestions that they may have as well. And we, like I said, we'll have this PowerPoint as well as a link to the YouTube video on the city's website under current city projects after today's meeting as well.
I'm guessing this ordinance doesn't give us anything, though, in the way of giving or doing any type of inspections on rental housing.
It's not specifically geared towards that, no.
Is that something that we can look at some point in time in the future? And the reason I say it is I really feel that, the instances that she talked about, if you're making money on a structure, you should have to meet basic safety guidelines. You should have to have basic electrical in each room. You should have to have smoke detectors. You should have to have basic plumbing met. I mean, people going without kitchen sinks, or kitchen sinks that are leaking so bad that it's, the flooring is going out. People having stairways that are so bad that they finally, the final step to get anything done is that somebody falls through the stairwell, through the stairs. And I actually know of this happening in a rental house, before anything is done by the owner. These are things that we as a city, I think, need to protect our renters, for just basic safety.
I don't disagree, and I can certainly talk to John and Marius to see what kind of inspections or processes we have in place, but off the top of my head, I don't know at this time.
Justin, as a matter of historical perspective, I think it was about 20 or maybe 22 years ago, I think promoted by the Davison County Child Protection Team, there was an attempt to have a uniform rental safety code adopted, and that went over about like a lead balloon. So maybe it's time to revisit that again.
I feel like it is. As I said, I honestly know somebody that fell through their stairs, and that's what it took for the owner to do something about the stairs. And I know of somebody else in another rental house that didn't have a kitchen sink. Did not have a kitchen sink. I mean, seriously, they just, the guy didn't want to come and as this woman spoke, you know, the rental situations that she was in, if you're gonna make money on a home, it really shouldn't be much different than having a business. You know, those of us that are in business have to meet specific inspections. So I don't understand why if you're making money on a home that you shouldn't have to also meet specific, at least basics, safety.
Well, I, just in case anybody in that situation is listening, for the time being, at the very least, I would recommend that if you're dealing with those situations, please consult an attorney in the area, because you don't know what your options are, and there very well could be something that could be done about your situation.
And that's difficult for them because a lot of them are, you know, new to the area, you know, or they don't have the finances to talk to an attorney either, you know, so, you know, that's difficult for them. But we could certainly have them come to the city then as well and at least report those kind of situations to, you know, to our nuisance abatement officer then as a part of, at least, you know, maybe some
We
initial.
have gotten calls like that down at
Have you?
Public Works, and we do relay them to our building inspector,
Good,
and he looks into them, so
good.
I don't know where they go from there, but
At least it's a start.
yeah.
One other question, Jim Taylor, by the way. In the current zoning ordinance, there's some provisions about off-street parking has to be on an all-weather surface. Have you given any consideration to incorporating that into the nuisance code? Because I think it's a zoning requirement that basically gets ignored.
I guess that's not something that I had specifically included in the current draft, but
Something to think about anyway.
yeah, it's something to think about, that's for sure.
Yeah, that applies across the spectrum to all the all the different designations. It's not just commercial. Districts, there I got it.
Any other comments?
I'd just like to support that lady who wrote the letter up in front about the trailer courts. We live near 900 West Second, and something needs to be done.
All right, well, if we don't have any other comments, I don't have anything else for you, so I appreciate everybody coming, and I guess we'll get this ready to get to council shortly.
Thanks for all your work.